I know that Genshin Impact's version 4.8 isn't here yet, but while watching the trailers and teasers, I noticed something that sent me spiraling down a weird rabbit hole full of fairy tales, dragons, tattoos, and the physics of rainbows. And I think all of these things are going to be big focal points in Natlan. Now, I didn't get this idea just by looking at the Natlan teaser. This also has a lot to do with the 4.8 flagship event because, in case you didn't know, the summer event before the new region drops usually foreshadows quite a bit of the main plot and themes for the upcoming region. It's not always obvious at first, but in retrospect, it is unmistakable. Like last summer, the Bottleland event teased the oceanid people of Fontaine, and even the Loom of Fate stuff that we learned about in the Bedtime Story Archon quest. As of time of recording, there are still a couple of weeks before the next patch drops. But I want to share these ideas while they're still fresh because this way we can be on the lookout for the stuff I've mentioned as we're playing through the event. And if I do end up getting somewhere close with today's speculations, I'll make an even bigger, more in-depth video about it towards the end of version 4.8. But for now, you're gonna get raw, unfiltered brain rot, so enjoy it, I guess. Now let me turn your attention towards the version 4.8 flagship event, Simulanka, so I can tell you why I think it'll matter to Natlan. The setup here is pretty straightforward. We've got a series of islands, kind of like the previous two Golden Apple Archipelago events, but this time it's fairy tale themed. And what's more, it's literally a book of fairy tales. Like, everything in it is origami, including all of the animals. Some of these animals are losing their color, so priority number 1 is helping them get their color back. Nilou is one of the characters who will help out with this, gaining a new outfit which allows her to assume a new role in this fairy tale play. Kind of like how Kaya became a dagger thief with his new skin last summer. But she does a rather interesting thing in the trailer. She restores color to a colorless area. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this, but in Sumeru, where she is from, withering zones were generally stripped of color, and it was especially noticeable in the desert since the areas were completely grayscale. But once you activated the towers nearby, the color returned to the withering zones. Now then, during the Dirge of Bilqis, we met a djinn named Lilupar who had been split into fragments after destroying a kingdom. Her main fragment was sealed in a tree, and as long as she was sleeping, the area was lush and green. But as soon as she woke up, everything withered and turned gray. We can see this phenomenon repeated at every one of her fragment locations, of which there are 7, which is the same number of colors in the standard rainbow, which is going to become more relevant in a second. But in the instances where she's creating these lush areas, she's asleep. And this phenomenon of things turning lush and green while the jinnies sleep is normal. Lilupar even says so. Now here's the thing. The Jinn are the children of the goddess of flowers, Nabu Malikata, who was a Seelie. And Nilou says that her original dance costume was based on descriptions of Nabu Malikata's clothing. Ergo, Nilou, narratively at least, was supposed to be a reference to the goddess of flowers within the Sumeru story. So having her perform the color restoration thing here in Simulanka makes some sense, thematically. Now, we don't know a lot about Seelies canonically, so this is just my speculation, okay? But Seelies are generally like little light spirits, right? Little will-o'-the-wisps, and eventually they become like a flame of a candle once they're at their court. And flames emit light. Now stick with me, we gotta go on a little bit of a ride. In Genshin, the world is basically made up of elements, right? These elemental dragons are basically forces of nature itself, and the elemental energy they release shapes the world. Now, elemental energy is often referred to in terms of colors of the rainbow or different light spectrums, of which there are 7, just like Lilupar's fragments, remember? And the easiest example of this can be found in this name card. So if dragons are the purest form of their element, which seems to be the case according to Breeze Amidst the Forest, and each element represents a spectrum of light, then consider the possibility that Nibelung, the king of the dragons, is responsible for splitting white light into its 7 respective colors. And I say this because of rainbow physics. See, a rainbow forms when light passes through water droplets at just the right angle, but generally speaking, we tend to see rainbows not during rainstorms because the sun will be hidden behind clouds, but when there's mist or fog that sunlight can pass through. Now, coincidentally, Nibelung's name is made of 2 words, Nibel, which comes from the root word for fog, mist, or cloud, and Lung, which means light as in lightweight. And yes, I'm aware that in my Sinner video I got the translation wrong. Never trust the dictionary. Anyway, this basically likens him to clouds, which are in the sky, hence why Neuvillette would call him the Heavenly Father in Chinese. But when those clouds are near the ground, they're more like a mist, which creates the ideal condition for rainbows. Now consider that dragons come from the light realm, presumably. So the idea here is that Nibelung is like a natural prism of mist or fog that splits the light into elements, and the elements make up the physical world. It feels thematically on point because light cubes seem to be everywhere in Simulanga. Like, look at the ones in the sky and the prismatic cubes coming out of the dragon's footprint. You know, at this point I should just make a whole video on optics in Genshin. But a prismatic light-splitting theme would be pretty fitting if Hoyo intends to equate Nibelung, or any dragon really, with the rainbow serpent Jurlungur, which I'm probably saying wrong, and I'm also aware is in Australia and not South America or Africa. And those are the two regions upon which Natlan should be based. However, there is a distinct possibility that Natlan is actually based on regions from the Ring of Fire, which would include Australia. There was also an instrument that sounded like a didgeridoo in the teaser, so it is a possibility. Thematically though, Jurlungur is also called the Great Father, which fits with the English title Novelette called Nibelung, the Formidable Father. Jurlungur also lives in precious bodies of water that refract light and act as a prism, which is noteworthy because of a world structure theory that I'm working on that should release a bit after this video that I'm not going to go into right now. But consider that thus far, dragons and bishops have designs that are based on aquatic life forms. Sealies too, actually, they're sea angels. So while I won't try to argue that Sealies are dragons, I think that by their nature they could be dragon adjacent, especially since this rainbow serpent god comes from a series of Australian myths collectively known in English as the Dreaming, and Sealies replenish the natural world around them while dreaming. So when you have regular Sealies acting as little candles emitting light, and how the not dead descendants of Sealies like Nilou Park can straight up restore dead washed out areas into lush green ones while dreaming, and we also consider how the elemental energy of dragons controls nature itself, we can make the assumption that removing these beings, or at least restricting their powers, could cause immense damage to the physical world. And suddenly, with Natlan's colorful themes, we can start to see why the event would be relating to Natlan, right? The people of Natlan have a very close relationship with their Saurian companions, to the point where they may be borrowing their powers directly, something indicated by their unique auras. These are the colors that Natlanians could risk losing in the upcoming Archon quest. Coincidentally, the flower from the Unfinished Reverie artifact set, which is all about Natlan's history, has its first line of text directly referencing losing their color. Now I know this is flavor text for the tribe banners and also a symbol of war, but I just thought it was so coincidental that it might not be a coincidence, but instead an intentional choice. Okay, but back on track. So this aura of the Natlanians, which may or may not be the result of a Saurian partnership, also seems to activate a special glowing marking on their bodies that are not otherwise visible. Now, if I remember correctly, outside of the 3 teased Natlan characters, glowing markings only appear on 5 characters in the game: Xiao, Zhongli, Venti, and then 2 more we're gonna get to in a second. These first 3 characters are all elemental beings, not super pure ones like dragons, but elemental beings nonetheless, and their tattoos also light up when in use. I was never really sure how much of these markings were just there because they look cool, or whether there was a reason for them to be there and for them to glow. Mostly because a lot of the Adepti and non-humans like the Kitsune, Tignarians, Andreas, and so on also have markings similar to the aforementioned tattoos, but without the light-up effects. But it's very curious to me that 2 of the glowing tat-havers are Archons while the other is an Adeptus of unknown origin. Also worth noting that both A and Rukkhadevata also have markings, but neither of them have markings that glow. In fairness though, we haven't really seen enough of Rukkhadevata to make any assumptions about her markings, but I think that A's markings don't glow because she's technically inside of a sword that definitely glows, that is then kept inside of a puppet's body, and she's not directly possessing the puppet body itself. Which matters because the 4th character with glowing tattoos is Wanderer, who should be the same type of puppet as Raiden, so the 2 should function in a similar manner. So if he has glowing tattoos, Raiden should have glowing tattoos, but she doesn't. Now, Wanderer has been shown wielding 2 different elements, both Electro and Animo, and more if you count his big robot body, but I'm not. Animo power is being channeled from his vision, which is why his tattoos light up with Animo colors, and Electro presumably came from the Gnosis. Both of these things powered him directly. I'm not entirely sure how different this is from A, possessing a sword that's then powering a puppet, but it's possible there's some technicalities that I'm just not aware of right now. Worth investigating later though. But Wanderer is actually pretty important here because he was present in the trailer as the one who could take on the dragon wreaking havoc in the Simulanga. Someone with glowing markings taking on a corrupted dragon that's causing trouble sounds like something that could happen in Natlan. Like a Natlanian with glowing markings, which means they have a Saurian companion, could be chosen to go up and fight a corrupted dragon to prevent everyone else from losing their Saurian connections. Now the 5th character with markings that glow is Ajdaha, a dragon whose markings glow with the element that he's channeling or borrowing from the ley lines, which is a +1 to the possibility that the Natlanians' markings are borrowed Saurian power, since Saurians are a type of dragon. But don't get it twisted, I'm not so much suggesting that this whole glowing tattoo thing is a dragon-specific trait, although I suppose it could be, but more that it's a sign of borrowed power. Like, in theory, if Wanderer was given access to raw elemental power from a ley line disorder or activated somebody else's vision, maybe, I suspect his tattoo's colors would change to match the element he was borrowing, similar to Ajdaha. He is a puppet, after all, so it would make sense if he was designed to accept any elemental input by default. It's not like A invented him in order to only accept Electro. She technically borrowed Conrian technology and adapted it to her own use. Now, how would this apply to Zhongli, Venti, and Xiao? Truthfully, I'm not sure. Maybe there's something we don't know. But I think it's worth keeping in the back of your mind. But I know the real question on your mind is, why did I go on all these really weird tangents just to talk about Natlan? Well, Natlan is called the Nation of War, or at least that's the Archon's ideal, much like Zhongli has his contracts or A has her eternity. But in each region, the Archon's ideal is narratively subverted somehow. So here's what I'm thinking, and I'm sorry if this idea is half-baked. If Natlan is themed around war, dragons, and the coexistence of dragons and humans, then we should be looking to Tevat's past to see what wars involved these things. And wouldn't you know it, the book Before Sun and Moon describes a war between dragons and the creator of all humans, wherein this creator, who we call the Primordial One, wanted the world for humans and thus tried to wipe out the primordial dragons. But notice how the option of coexistence was never even brought up or considered or mentioned. Like no failed treaties or an attempted partnership or anything. Well, I think Natlan is a nation where we get to see what a world made for both humans and dragons could look like if they had been willing to share and compromise. If Natlan is preparing for war, or if they have ceremonial wars between tribes, then it could be that they are preparing themselves to fight for a future where coexistence is not only possible, but preferable. A war not to conquer, but to protect. And the reason I think this is likely comes back to the whole stripping of color thing. Because if you have a nation that lives in harmony with dragons that are represented by colors of light, and then you keep making references to colors being stripped away, then it seems like the main threat in Natlan will be the tribes losing their Saurians, or losing access to their powers, or that there's a growing divide between the ideals of humans and dragons that threatens not only their relationship, but the stability of the world itself. That's basically my prediction for Natlan. We'll see how everything holds up after we go through the 4.8 event. But speaking of, you might have noticed that there's witches and Hexencircle stuff everywhere in the 4.8 event. And the reason for this is probably because it's a storybook. According to the lore of the Imaginarium Theater, the Hexencircle witches liked to make the fairy tales of Anders' daughter come to life. So things relating to storybooks and that kind of thing are almost always witch-coded in this game. Now, in the past, I've pitched the idea that Mondstadt is supposed to be a fairy tale city wherein each character represents an important figure or event from Tevat's history, and that is one of the reasons why it's not only the Traveler's home base for gameplay reasons, but also one of the reasons that the Hexencircle settled there eventually. A fairy tale city for fairy tale witches. But allegorically speaking, if we want to see Mondstadt's representative for Natlan, we need look no further than Bennett, who has some interesting overlaps with Janssen from the Travail trailer. But that also feels like an intro to a bigger theory that definitely needs way more time to cook, so we'll let the witches get their own video, okay? I do think it's plausible that we finally get to meet them in person in Natlan, though, because it is possible to directly connect the witches with the dragons. And I'm not just talking about how Rheindotter has made several dragons, but again, that's a theory for another time. Anyway, that's all I have for right now. Hopefully that all made sense, and I'm sorry if it didn't. I know there's still a lot that I didn't cover, all these little Easter eggs and tiny observations in the trailer, like how Wanderer is presented in the trailer looking at a toy soldier like the one from his teaser. But why don't you guys take the wheel on this one and let me know your favorite detail from the 4.8 and 5.0 preview in the comment section. So far, I am super hyped for Natlan, despite the severe lack of melanin present thus far. But besides that, everything seems pretty hype. But good lord, they are referencing a lot of different cultures. My lore prep reading list is so long. But that's a me problem. Anywho, big thank you to all my channel members for supporting these little bouts of madness of mine, and another thanks to you, yes, you, for watching. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you next time.